welcome. It's great to see all of you here. Literally see all of you here. That's amazing. And I'm so excited to welcome you here at the physical venue. I'm also really excited not to see, but at least to feel the presence of our online audience who will also be joining us today at the 2021 KPSRL Annual Conference. So we have a really packed schedule today, and I'm really excited about the program. I'm excited about the program every year, but this year I felt that it really actually touched on something, if I can use the word zeitgeisty, about what our community is really experiencing. I feel that this is a sector and a community that always occupies itself with inequality, with injustice. And that's exactly what we want to be tackling. But what we at the KPSRL Secretariat started to feel was that that critique, that look at injustice, that frustration with how things should be shifted, actually started to look more inward at our own sector. So, my name is Megan Price, and I'm the head of office here at the KPSRL, at the Knowledge Platform for Security and Rule of Law. And today we are talking about exactly that, about asymmetric power, not only in the societies that are riven by conflict and violence, but also within the development and peace work that we ourselves are looking to contribute to, and we ourselves have a role in trying to change. We are going to try and move beyond rhetoric today. We're going to look at how asymmetric power breaks down into the different systems of our work. And we're doing that through the program. So if you have a look at your program, you'll notice that we have 6 different sub-themes. And we've tried to organize all of the sessions today around these themes to try and give more concrete thrust to what often can be overly lip service, superficial reflections. We really want the discussions today to be real. They want to be critical, they want to be candid, and if you can use the opportunity in today's sessions to try and elevate and try and lift someone else into a position of power that might not actually have that experience often, I really encourage you to do that, whether you're here with us in The Hague or online. So the first set of sessions is called Asymmetry in the System. These are sessions that are focusing on how the very sector that we work in, the mechanisms that run that sector, are themselves asymmetric in the way that they distribute power. The second row of sections is called Flexible Where It Counts. This is about our partnerships and how we can make them more adaptive, more open. How can we be better partners to those who we work with? The third session's on local voices and visibility. These are sessions that are looking to spotlight the ingenuity, the insight, the genius, the capacity of locally driven initiatives and give them the respect and dignity that they deserve. The fourth set is what localization looks like. These are sessions that focus on concrete ways in which we can affirm the power and the efficacy and the brilliance of local processes, local initiatives, and there are concrete ways to do that. So these sessions are really going to focus on that specifically. The last row of sessions is broken into 2. The first, the courage to concede. This is where we're asking some of those who recognize that they have a great deal of power, start to recognize how they can respect and recognize the power of others, what their responsibility is to open the table to others. And the second in the afternoon is called Resilience Redux. This is talking about actually the power to define. I think our sector, and I think you'll probably agree, is riven with jargon and terminology. Some of it's pretty antiquated, some of it's pretty problematic. So let's talk about how we can readjust our language as a device of power and who can help us redefine some of those terms. All right, now, as many of you know, it would not be a KPSRL conference without some Mentimeter. So this is, if you've not done Mentimeter before, you're gonna love it. What I would do is encourage you all, and also those of you at home, you'll see the slide on your screens now. Use the QR code with your iPhone or your smartphone, and it will take you to some survey questions. If you don't have a QR code reader, all you need to do is go to menti.com and type in that 8-digit code, 795 97147. Once you do that, you'll be presented with 3 survey questions. And we're going to use the survey questions to try and bring our online and our in-person audience together a bit, to try and see how this hybrid community can actually connect despite the distance. On that note, I'd like to really encourage, especially those of you online, but also those of you here in the room. We've integrated a new tool, or some might call it a new toy, into our program this year. It's called Wonder, and I really encourage you to check it out during the lunch networking. So especially for those of you who are home and feel that you're not getting to do the networking that you would like to do at a conference, this is going to be a great advantage to you. What it allows you to do is navigate an open space. You take your avatar, you move around. When you come together with somebody, you're suddenly put into a video conference, as if you approach somebody at the coffee table and wanted to strike up a conversation. It's actually really fun, and I genuinely encourage you to do it. Also, you here at the physical venue, although I know a lot of you are just excited to see actual people again. So as those of you are putting in your final answers, I'm going to move very quickly. Oh, yes, that's what I wanted to show you. This is where you'll find the Wonder. In the program on the virtual venue, it's right here during the lunch virtual networking. You just click that and pop out over into the link, and you should be able to find it then. All right. We will be joined by Marriët Schuurman in just a minute. I'm hoping that we have some Mentimeter results to be able to show to you shortly. And if not, then I can just simply talk about how excited I am to see so many of you in person. I'm curious, how many of you, is this your first time to KPAC? Apparently, wow, it's 58% of the respondents, it's their first KPAC. So welcome to this new community that we've been able to bring together. And for 49%, you've been here before, so we're happy to see you again. Which countries are you joining us from? This one I'm very excited about. I'm actually very curious where our online community might be coming from. Mariah, I think if you press S, it would help. Well, there we go. Okay, so obviously a lot of us are here from the Netherlands. We've got some from Germany, from France, Belgium. Oh, I see someone from Mozambique and Colombia. Welcome. Someone from South Korea as well, Sri Lanka. It's, okay, so great. There's quite a lot of you online. For some of you, I think it's quite early in the morning, so kudos. And the third question, which I genuinely can't remember. Oh yes, how are you participating today? Are you online or offline? Okay, so a lot of the answers are from those of you here with us in the audience today. And then some of you will be coming and going as you please. I can appreciate that. So we've got a good representation of those in the audience and a good representation of those online. Thanks so much, Mariah, for sharing the results. What I'd like to do now is introduce Marriët Schuurman. She is the director of the Department for Stabilization and Humanitarian Aid. And she's also on the advisory group of the UN Peacebuilding Fund and of the KPSRL. She was previously served as the Human Rights Ambassador for the Netherlands and as the task force leader when the Dutch held their seat on the Security Council. So, Marriët, may I welcome you to the stage?
Redressing the power balance by taking off your shoes. As an example, one of those privileges you have indeed that you did nothing, in your personal, accomplishment that allowed you to have that position. So they're off. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Megan, for all the organization and for your amazing leadership, getting us together again. This is not my first one. I think this is my second or even my third one. It is, I know, a lot, particularly in this hybrid format, is a lot of work. And I'm really happy that we can see each other in person, but I'm also very happy for all those that join us online. And I hope that this is the start of sort of redressing a bit of the imbalances in power by this hybrid way of meeting and allowing people cross borders, across the world and across different themes and sectors to connect and learn from each other. So thank you for allowing us to do that. Let me be short, because we all want to listen to Séverine. So, I think for those who heard me speak before, they know that I feel that COVID crisis didn't come for nothing. And it has, I think, for us, in a way, in our work, reconfirmed, I always say, the urgency and the relevance of our work, and the urgency of relevance precisely to build and foster the resilience and the dignity of those furthest behind. COVID has exacerbated pre-existing inequalities, and with our ambition to build forward better, we try to redress those. Building or fostering local resilience, the resilience of the most affected and the most vulnerable people worldwide, is not a new idea. I always say it's a radically old idea. We used to call it ownership, participatory planning. You know, for 40 years we've been talking about it. It's radically old. It's nothing new. It's not revolutionary. It just takes listening. And yet it's terribly difficult to do. And I'm extremely grateful for the Knowledge Platform to drop the P word, power, because that is why it is so difficult to get the things right and to do what we know is a logical thing and the only effective thing if we want to address inequality and poverty and fragility in the world. That is to listen to those affected most and to foster the power and the agency and the resilience that they already have. And they have demonstrated during COVID response that they have that resilience. But it is about a shift in power, in who sets the agenda, who is in the driver's seat. And I think COVID has only forced us to critically self-reflect and to think why we haven't come there and what we do to do better this time. Unfortunately, we're not doing a good job. IMF just released a report that the recovery gap is only increasing. So between the richest and the poorest countries, inequality is growing because of COVID, because of vaccine inequality, and because of lack of opportunities for policies to address actually vulnerabilities of our people. So, but it is about the P-word, who sets the agenda? We have to recognize, as I said, the power and the agency that the most vulnerable people and their communities have, and use their knowledge and wisdom and listen to them in order to find ways to address inequalities that make us all vulnerable, as we have seen. So it's a change in mindset. And like every change process, what we need is leadership, accountable leadership, accountability not to our taxpayers, because our taxpayers are easily convinced, but accountability to the affected people, that we really listen and are able to respond according to their needs from our different mandates. So accountable leadership in order to increase the pressure on ourselves, I think, to do the right thing. Equal partnerships, and I think the Knowledge Platform is critical for that as well. Partnerships to collectively, from the different mandates, address vulnerabilities and foster that local resilience and dignity. And finally, learning from each other. We can learn from the humanitarian sector. The humanitarian sector can learn from us, peace builders. They can learn from the development world as well in how we actually best foster, how we listen, and how we are agile in our response, in really making sure that we have a people-driven, a needs-driven, a locally driven response to and at just and inclusive peace for all. So I think today is a huge learning opportunity, and that's the value, I think, of this forum. I wish you all a very good learning opportunity, a learning journey, inspiring, and with a focus not so much on process and on the how, but on the why and the why not, a focus on impact, and focus on the difference we all want to make. And that is really to boost the dignity, the self-reliance, and the resilience of those left furthest behind, for us all to be better off, to live in a peaceful world in which inequalities don't persist and affect us all, because we all suffer from those. So with that said, I think that is my ambition for the day, to enjoy the learning journey, and I'm very happy to listen to Séverine on locally driven change and local knowledge. Thank you.
All right then. Well, without further ado, I'm very excited to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Séverine Autesserre. Séverine has written many books. She is the professor of political science at Barnard College at Columbia University, and she's written several books about the topic that we are wrestling with today. The first was The Trouble with Congo, which really focused on the way in which some of the more violent and enduring conflicts of our time create a lot of attention from the international community. But we need to be more critical about the role of that community and how they are intervening. So the first book on The Trouble with Congo really focused on why the international interventions often fail despite these tremendous resources that they bring in, and maybe sometimes because of those tremendous resources. The second book was Peaceland, which focused actually much more idiosyncratically on individuals and habits and the social constructs and the social world of some of these peacekeepers, and how that helped to perpetuate incorrect analysis or incorrect narratives around some of the conflicts that they were ostensibly supposed to be addressing. But what we're really excited to hear about today is her third and most recent book, Frontlines of Peace, because I think, as Séverine will help us understand, it's not all doom and gloom. There's really important ways to look at these issues on what works, and what she seems to be able to reveal is that what works is what is happening closest to the conflict, what is happening within the communities themselves as they try to address the problems and the issues that are leading to violence. So I want to keep it pretty short because I want to make sure we have as much time as possible for Séverine. So Séverine, I'm going to let you welcome you to the stage.
Thank you so much, Megan, for this very kind introduction, and thanks for organizing this conference, for inviting me. Thanks to all of you for being here today in person. It's so wonderful to have in-person events again. And thanks to all of you who are joining us online. I also saw people from Sri Lanka. It must be the middle of the night for you. So I'm absolutely thrilled to talk with you about the front lines of peace, because the front lines of peace is exactly about the themes of this year's conference. It's about asymmetric power, and most importantly, it's about how we can all challenge structural inequalities and promote more equitable partnerships. And as Megan said, The Frontlines of Peace is a book about hope. It's a book about the ordinary and yet extraordinary people and communities who have found effective ways to confront violence. And so to start, I want to tell you a story about these kinds of people. And it's a story that takes place in Congo, in the midst of, as you know, one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. In 2007, a little boy named Luca was kidnapped, and he was forced to work for an armed group and for rebels, just like the ones you now see on my slide. And Luca was so small at the time that he couldn't even hold a rifle. So his commanders would march him up front and use him as a human shield. Somehow, Luca survived, and after 3 years with the armed group, the militia commanders released him and they sent him back home to his mother, Justine. But Luca had trouble assimilating. He hated school. He was often hungry because his mom didn't have much money. And he still believed what his commanders had drilled into him, that the only way to survive was to use violence. So Luca kept running away to join militias. The only time he felt safe was when he had a gun in his hands. He was 8, and this was the only life that he knew. Meanwhile, in the United States, a young Indian-American woman named Vijaya Thakur was working for various aid organizations focused on Congo. And Vijaya was growing very uncomfortable with her work because her colleagues used the traditional top-down approach to peace building. They relied on outsider skills and expertise, and as a result, they ended up harming the very people they wanted to help. So for instance, most of them believed that violence in Congo was due to the illegal exploitation of minerals like coltan, which the young men in my photo are mining. So they focused their time and efforts on advocating new laws on conflict minerals. But the new regulations cost many vulnerable people their jobs, and these people then had to join armed groups in order to survive. So whenever Vijaya traveled to Congo, she started asking ordinary citizens what they believed would lead to peace. And that's a photo of her doing just that. And eventually, she decided to try something in the village where Justin and Luca were living. In partnership with local activists, Vijaya organized lengthy meetings and workshops so that the residents would develop their own analysis of the conflicts they face and decide what the best responses would be. The first part of the plan that the villagers came up with was for Vijaya and her fellow activists to give out $40 each to a few village women, including Justine, who used the money to start small businesses like tailoring and donut shop, businesses of the kind that you see in my photos. The businesses took off, and eventually the participants had enough money to implement the second part of their plans. So they installed taps for clean drinking water, and they organized trainings for the teachers to learn how to curb ethnic violence rather than fueling it. And eventually, they lobbied local authorities for protection and better services. So Luca now had 3 meals a day. He had shoes without holes, and he had role models who didn't use violence to survive and gain power. And like Luca, all of the villagers were safer and they were healthier. And one day, Vijaya was talking with Justine, and Justine kept using the word success to refer to the whole initiative. It was because Luca had turned 13, and for the very first time in his life, he was speaking in the future tense. He had stopped running away all the time, and he was making plans, peaceful plans within his community. He now wanted to hold a pencil instead of a gun. And now you see where the cover artist has found her inspiration for the cover of my book. As for Vijaya, she decided to create the Resolve Network, which has used this approach to help more than 7,000 people over the past 10 years. All were individuals at risk of being recruited by armed groups, and actually more than half of them were former combatants like Luca. As you know, militias have formed and reformed in Congo. The pressure to remobilize has been enormous, but not a single person participating in the Resolve programs has started or gone back to fighting. And to me, this story is inspiring. It's also very telling because there are huge differences between the way most peace-building organizations work and what Vijaya did. To start, Vijaya decided to build peace from the grassroots by relying on insiders, instead of always focusing on elites and leaders in capital cities and headquarters. And even more importantly, Vijaya didn't come and impose her beliefs, and that way, she avoided doing more harm than good. Unlike so many people before her, Vijaya was humble, she was respectful, and she put ordinary citizens in the driver's seat. Peace builders who work like Vijaya are a minority in the aid world, but they exist. I've found them within many different organizations, working in many different countries. And the work that they do is incredibly important because, unfortunately, there are many people who face the same kind of terrible circumstances that Justine and Luca faced. More than 1.5 billion people live under the threat of violence in more than 50 conflict zones around the world, in the countries you now see in red on my map. And so peace building is a crucial task for many states and international institutions. And when I say peace building, I really mean any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. But the thing is that our templates and techniques for approaching war and peace just don't work. Afghanistan, Colombia, Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar, we've heard the same story many times before. There was violence. The United Nations got involved. Donor countries pledged millions in assistance. Warring parties called for ceasefires, they signed agreements, they held elections, and the headlines praised peace. And then a week or two later, sometime just days later, violence flared up again. Often, it had never actually ended. And in many cases, it lasted for years after. You know that more than half of all ongoing wars have already lasted for more than 20 years? In just the past 5 years, wars have caused the worst refugee crisis since World War II. When you talk with inhabitants of war-torn countries, as I'm sure most of you do on an everyday basis, you realize that they are absolutely fed up with the apparent inability of governments, peacekeepers, and international institutions to stem the flood of violence. And our newspapers keep running headlines like the one you see in my photos. And yeah, there has been plenty of discussion about what has gone wrong when we've tried to stop wars in the past. But now, I think it's time to ask, what has gone right? And it turns out that elections don't bring peace, and democracy itself may not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. Contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving power to ordinary citizens. Ultimately, many successful examples of peace building in the past few years have involved innovative grassroots initiatives led by local people and at times supported by foreigners, just like the South African peacekeeper you see with me in the photo, and often using methods shunned by the international elite. So rather than focusing on handshakes between presidents, abstract peace agreements and negotiations between governments and rebel leaders, the front lines of peace details the concrete, everyday actions that actually make a difference on the ground. Some of these are bizarre, some are creative, some involve age-old traditions, and some are just common sense. My book explains how peace building can actually work so that we can finally improve the lives of billions of people. And I show that to end violence from war, and also to address violent conflicts at home, whether home is The Hague or New York City, whether it's Bogota or Saint-Georges-de-Montaigu, we have to fundamentally change the way we view and build peace. And I make this argument by building on more than 20 years of work in 12 different conflict zones, so in the countries you now see in red on my map, as well as more than 800 in-depth interviews with peace builders, politicians, warlords, survivors, local populations, and outside observers. So if you see my photos, on the bottom, right or left, I always get them confused. Anyway, on one of the bottom photos, you see me conducting interviews, and the other one, I'm conducting participant observation. I was patrolling with United Nations peacekeepers, and I was really happy that day. I thought, yay, I'm such a good ethnographer, I'm fitting in. But the thing is that I'm not a man, and there were only men on this military base. And also, I felt that there was something wrong with my bulletproof jacket. I went patrolling with the peacekeepers for several hours, and the bulletproof jacket was heavy, it wasn't comfortable, didn't protect my heart or any of my vital organs. And it's only when we were back to the base that one of the Indian officers told me, you've been wearing it backward. Anyway, I still got really good material that day. So in the front lines of peace, I first tell the stories of ordinary people, grassroots activists, and foreign interveners who did manage to make a difference in war zones. Then I describe the limitations with the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually excludes local citizens and ordinary grassroots activists. Then, building on these stories, I describe a better way to help reestablish peace in war zones around the world. And the conclusion shows how residents of ostensibly peaceful countries, for instance in Europe and North America, can use the lessons from the book to address violent tensions at home, ranging from inner city conflicts to political and religious divides. So let me tell you the story of Ichwi, which is quite literally an island of peace in Congo. For the past 20 years, one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II has raged around Ichwi, and despite the presence of one of the largest and one of the most expensive peacekeeping missions in the world, several million people have died, hundreds continue to die every day, but Ichwi itself has avoided mass violence. So the island is stunningly beautiful. As you can see in the photo I took when I was there, but what makes the place even more noteworthy, and the peace even more surprising, is that the island contains all of the same preconditions for violence that have fueled generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. You have a geostrategic location. As you can see on my map, Ichwi is located right at the border between Congo and Rwanda, two countries that have been at war regularly since the 1990s. Ichwi also has mineral resources, ethnic tensions, lack of state authority, extreme poverty, local conflicts over land and traditional power, and many other features that have led to generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. And what's fascinating about Ichwi is that the island is peaceful because of the active, everyday involvement of all of its citizens, including the people you now see in my photos, and including the poorest and the least powerful ones. So it's not the state, it's not the police or the army who manage to control tensions, and it's not foreign peace builders either. It is the members of the community themselves. And they do this by fostering what they call a culture of peace, by organizing in local structures and grassroots associations that help resolve conflict, and by drawing on strong beliefs that help prevent and deter violence by both insiders and outsiders, such as blood pacts. Blood pacts are traditional promises between two parties who agree never to hurt each other. So the story of Ichwi shows us that local community resources can help build peace sometimes better than the usual elite agreements and outside interventions. And foreign peace builders like you and I can help in this process. Take the teams of the Life and Peace Institute in Congo. LPI is a Swedish peace-building organization that is involved in various conflict zones and usually focuses on working at the grassroots. The LPI Congo team bases its action on in-depth local expertise, and they reject universal approaches to peace building. They rely on local employees supervised by a few foreigners, and these foreigners often have extensive pre-existing country knowledge. So LPI doesn't implement programs directly. Instead, it works with and through a few handpicked local organizations, and the main role of these organizations is to support people on the ground. So these local organizations empower ordinary citizens to develop their own analysis of their community's conflicts, decide what the best responses would be, like for instance they're doing in this photo, and then implement the solutions. So you see the difference with the usual way to build peace in war zones. In the LPI model, it's not foreigners based in headquarters and capital cities who conceive, design, and implement peace-building programs. It's not national or provincial elites either, and it's not the state or the government. Instead, it is the members of the community themselves, including ordinary people and including former combatants and current combatants, who conceive, design, and implement peace-building programs with the help of LPI and its local partners. And I'm going to give you a concrete example so that you can see how it actually works in practice. So for years, there was a deadly conflict in the Ruzizi Plain in eastern Congo. It led to a lot of death, a lot of suffering, and the involvement of local militias, Congolese politicians, and even the Rwandan government. And so in 2007, 3 Congolese organizations decided to help address these tensions with the help of LPI and its local partners. And for 3 years, they focused on understanding what the problem was. They organized a lot of small and large meetings, and in these meetings like the one you see here, and in these meetings, they actually included everyone. Ordinary citizens, ministers, soldiers, army officers, rebel leaders, civil society activists, farmers, women's groups, etc. They progressively realized that the conflict was not so much a proxy war between Congo and Rwanda, as we interveners thought at the time, but rather it was a conflict between herders and farmers. Because cattle often destroyed crops. The farmers retaliated by killing the herders, whose families reached out to local militias, who went on to attack the farmers' communities, and so on and so forth. So all of the people involved, the ordinary citizens, the combatants, they all designed solutions that they thought would work to address the problems that they viewed at the root of the violence. So for instance, they installed tracks for moving cattle with minimal disruptions to farmers. They also established mediation committees in which representatives of both herders and farmers would smooth out any tensions that may arise, because, you know, with cattle, even with this kind of really, really clear signs, you can't always make sure they stay on the right path. So obviously, there were challenges, issues, and setbacks. But to make a long story short, while all of the elite agreements and outside intervention had never really made a difference on the ground before, local residents saw tangible results once LPI and its local partners got involved. For several years, the seasonal migration of cattle took place with very little violence. Dozens of militiamen handed in their weapons. And militia groups and ethnic groups that were fighting slowly started working and living together. They started sharing the same market, for instance. So outsiders can help re-establish peace. But the catch is that to really help, we can't continue acting the way we usually do. Because there are huge limitations with the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually excludes local citizens and grassroots activists. The Peace Inc. conventional approach to peace building relies on misleading and detrimental assumptions, like the idea that only top-down intervention can end armed violence. The idea that all good things come together. So, for instance, that democracy will naturally lead to peace. And the idea that only outsiders have the required skills and expertise to build peace. So take the way my own career in international aid got started. When I was 23, I got my very first job out of graduate school as assistant country director for Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World, in Kosovo. And so if you see my photos, that's me at the time, and next to me is my wonderful husband, Philip, who's taken a lot of the photos I'm showing you today, especially the photos where I'm actually in the photo. So when I arrived in Kosovo, I didn't speak Albanian or Serbo-Croatian. I had virtually no knowledge of Kosovar history, politics, and culture. I actually started reading my first book about the Balkans on the flight there, but the flight was coming from Paris, so it was way too short, so I never finished that book. But I got the job because I spoke decent English. I had 2 fancy master's degrees, a good training in political analysis, and even some field experience in a variety of post-war places and developing countries. And in hindsight, I feel terrible when I think about my Kosovar assistant at the time. His name was Nerim. Nerim had 20 years' experience analyzing political, social, and economic issues. He had a tremendous knowledge of the Balkans' history, politics, and culture. He had lived in Kosovo all his life. He was also much older and much wiser than I was. But I was the outsider, so I was in charge. My job was to analyze the political, security, and humanitarian situation and write reports for my supervisors, but really it was Nerim who had the skills that I lacked. The thing is that I had never managed anyone or supervised anyone in my life before. I was 23. So I had no idea how to deal with him. And eventually I found a way to keep him busy. I asked him to compile and translate clippings from the local press. And I can still see him every morning religiously posting his work on our bulletin board, and none of my colleagues ever read it. Even I often didn't have the time to do that. It was such a waste of time, energy, and talent. And I realized afterward that this was not a stroke of good luck for me and bad luck for Nerim. That was a typical situation for foreign peace builders. Most foreign peace builders assume that local people do not have what it takes to build peace, that they are incompetent, corrupt, and violent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at war. And by contrast, interveners believe that they have the required skills and expertise. Because to them, what makes a good peace builder is education and work experience in specialized topics like gender or human rights, or election organization, and if possible, having worked in a variety of conflict zones. And by contrast, and although there are exceptions, the knowledge of country specialists is usually much less valued, and the knowledge of local people usually trivialized. The result is that in virtually all aid and peace-building organizations, foreigners fill the management positions and local people make up the lower level staff. And the foreigners often don't speak local languages, and they often have no in-depth understanding of local societies, cultures, and institutions, just like me in Kosovo. Sadly, the consequences are often disastrous. Well-meaning international efforts have led to an increase in violence in places ranging from Afghanistan to Congo. And I'll tell you a story that to me exemplifies all of that. It's a story, again, that takes place in Congo. In 2004, rebels took over the city of Bukavu, the city in the photo you can see now, the city where Prisca comes from, and you're going to hear from Prisca very soon. So in 2004, the rebels went on a looting, raping, and killing spree. And I was there at the time. The situation was absolutely terrifying, right? Yeah. And at a point, a little boy and his mother saw several soldiers enter the house just next to theirs. And they heard shouts and they heard screams, and it was obvious that their neighbor was about to be raped. So the little boy ran to seek help at the nearby peacekeeping base, but when he arrived at the peacekeeping base, the Uruguayan soldier on duty didn't speak Swahili, didn't speak French, didn't speak any of the local languages. The little boy was panicking. He tried and tried to communicate what was happening, but still the peacekeeper didn't understand. And finally, the soldier broke into a huge smile. And he made a sign that, wait, I understand, wait. He went inside the base, and he came back a few minutes later with a pack of cookies that he handed to the boy. Cookies. So yeah, outsiders do not always understand what's going on, and relying on them exclusively can be really problematic. Another standard problem with our standard approach to peace is that many conflicts revolve around political, social, and economic stakes that are distinctively local. And when I say local, I really mean at the level of the individual, the family, the clan, the municipality, the district. And Prisca is going to tell you a lot more about that in a few minutes. So our usual top-down approach that focuses on outsiders and elites and governments, it is not and it cannot be enough. And I realized that for the first time during one of my very first trips to Congo. In 2003, I met this woman who was my age. Her name was Isabel. So local militias had attacked Isabel's village. They had killed many men, they had raped many women, they had looted everything. And then they wanted to take Isabel, but her husband stepped in and he said, no, please don't take Isabel, take me instead. So he had gone through the forest with the militias, and Isabel never saw him again. And the reason why militias had attacked Isabel's village was not due to national or international conflicts like the conflict between Congo and Rwanda. No. It was because the rebels wanted to take the land that the villagers needed to cultivate food and to survive. And Isabel's story has stayed in my mind all these years because it embodies the awful consequences of local conflicts that foreign peace builders so often ignore. So, of course, we could talk for hours about the problems, all of the problems with our standard approach to peace, but In the few minutes that I have left, I want to tell you how we can change that. Because I really think that we need to focus on success stories instead of always looking at issues, challenges, and failure. And so these past few years, I've looked for cases of what I call unlikely peace. Places where everything conspires to cause violence, and yet, somehow, you have peace, like in Ijwi. And I've found places like that all over the world, in Afghanistan, Congo, Colombia, Israel and the Palestinian territories, Somalia, like in the villages where I took the 2 photos you see now on my slide. And the example I like best is the story of Somaliland. There is a really interesting contrast between, on the one hand, Somalia, which is, as you know, extremely violent, has some of the highest rankings in the world's least desirable category, most corrupt country, second most failed state, etc. And on the other hand, you have this autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is named Somaliland, that went through a devastating independence war with Somalia in the late 80s and in the 1990s. A war that destroyed nearly 90% of the towns, some of which still haven't been rebuilt, as you can see if the clicker is not working. Now it is. As you can see in the photo now on my slide, I took it like just a couple of years ago. But Somaliland now, for the past 20 years, Somaliland has experienced little violence, little terrorism, and it now has a well-functioning state, decent public services, as you can see in my photo of the capital, Hargeisa, and even some kind of functioning democracy. So, of course, there are many reasons for the difference between Somalia and Somaliland. But the main one is that the usual top-down, outsiders-led approach prevailed in the rest of Somalia, while Somaliland benefited from sustained grassroots peace-building initiatives that were led by insiders, by Somalilanders themselves. And Somaliland shows us that local people can help promote peace not only on a small scale, like in Ijwi, but also over a large territory and a quasi-state. And the good news is that we can support this kind of efforts without falling into the same old tired relationships between insiders and outsiders that I've told you about, and without destroying local peace efforts, as interveners so often do. Because there are role models we can learn from. In my research, I found a lot of original, out-of-the-box approaches by interveners who did manage to actually make a difference on the ground. And I talk a lot about these people in the book. Actually, I think that some of them are sitting in this room. They're named Peter Van Holden, Banual Tumbas, Lemak Bowie, Vijaya Thakur, James Cambery. They come from all over the world. They work for very different organizations in very different countries, but they have a few things in common. They don't believe that as outsiders they know better, that they have the right theories, skills, and expertise, or that they bring the ideal solutions to people's problems. Instead, they respect local residents, they listen to them, and they're open-minded. They understand that other people may have a different understanding of peace, democracy, and development, and different priorities. They also know the local context well. They speak at least some of the local languages, and they have extensive local networks. They're in it for the long run. They stay on site for years, sometimes decades. They don't place themselves at the forefront of peace efforts, and they don't put their logos everywhere. Instead, they remain low profile, and they turn the spotlight on the achievements of their local partners, local organizations, local staff, local authorities, ordinary people. They're flexible. They keep adapting their strategies based on the result and feedback that they get and the way the situation evolves. And lastly, they understand that sometimes there are hard choices to make because all good things do not go together. So we may have to choose between worthy goals, for instance, between peace and justice or peace and democracy. And the best interveners understand that they shouldn't be the ones who make these choices. The people who have to live with the consequences of a decision should be the ones making it. And by way of conclusion, there is one last thing that I want to mention. All of these ideas, all of these lessons from conflict zones can help us address not only tensions in war zones around the world, but also political, cultural, and communities conflict in North America and in Europe. And I'm more than happy to talk more about that during the coffees or the virtual networking if you're interested. But the important point, and of course, our governments and international institutions and representatives have an important role to play because, as we all know, peace, real peace, lasts only when built both from the bottom up and from the top down. But the important point is that whether at home or abroad, we sorely need more individuals that work like Vijaya and Justin and more like the inhabitants of Ijwi in Somaliland. We sorely need more organizations that work like Resolve and the Life and Peace Institutes and more programs that follow the basic principles we told you about. Because it's with organizations and programs like these that we can help the 1.5 billion people who live under the threat of violence in conflict zones. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Séverine, for the inspiring talk. We are now going to move to the last portion of our program, and I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it a bit short, but we find it really important. The last portion of our program will be held in French. It will be a conversation between Séverine and Prisca Bukaraba, who has joined us from Congo. And with that, I'd like to welcome Messina to the stage. For those of you like myself who don't speak French, we appreciate your courteous attention, and subtitles, English subtitles, will be added to the recording after the conference. Messina.
Bienvenue encore une fois à toutes et à tous. Notre oratrice principale a déjà été introduite. Ce matin, nous avons le privilège, mais aussi l'honneur, de l'avoir en conversation avec Madame Prisca Bukaraba, en provenance de la République démocratique du Congo. Prisca est directrice de la radio Iliba FM à Bukavu, mais elle est aussi une activiste congolaise des droits de l'homme, mais aussi une artisane de paix. Prisca s'implique beaucoup dans sa communauté, dans différentes activités visant à promouvoir le bien-être socio-économique et culturel des communautés. Elle a été primée à plusieurs reprises en reconnaissance de son travail exceptionnel pour les droits humains, mais aussi de son dévouement et de son combat pour les droits des jeunes, des défenseurs des droits humains, mais aussi des femmes. Prisca, puis-je t'inviter à rejoindre la scène principale? C'est vrai.
Donc Prisca, vous êtes très familière avec toutes les réalités que je viens de mentionner pendant la keynote. Quelles sont vos réactions?
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que je n'aurais pas peut-être besoin, j'en aurais besoin peut-être du micro. Merci beaucoup. J'avoue que j'étais très émue d'être en face de l'auteur qui parle sur mon pays, qui parle des réalités de mon pays. Au fait, à un certain moment, j'étais en train de revivre les réalités de mon pays et c'est très émouvant. Au fait, les images prouvent même qu'elle a été réellement sur terrain parce que j'ai vu des photos d'Idjwi. Je suis native d'Idjwi. Je l'ai suivi par lettre d'Idjwi, donc je proviens de l'île d'Idjwi. J'habite à Bukavu, à l'est du pays. Comme vous le savez, l'est de la RDC, c'est la partie la plus sécurisée. Aussi, c'est la partie avec des conflits violents dans le continent, plutôt j'allais dire dans notre pays, dans la République du Congo. Et la RDC est le même comme pays de la région des Grands Lacs, c'est top des conflits par rapport au Rwanda, le Burundi et l'Ouganda. Les causes sont déjà connues de ces conflits intercommunautaires, c'est notamment le problème, les causes foncières, avec notamment les limites. Le Congo est vaste, mais les gens se disputent de ces limites parce qu'il y a certaines communautés qui prennent certaines entités comme leur identité. Idjui, c'est pour les Bahavou et par conséquent, ce sont les Havou qui doivent habiter. Calais, c'est pour une partie des Havou, une partie des Chi. Donc, vous appropriez une entité à tel point que vous prenez cette entité comme votre identité et il suffit qu'une personne essaye d'aller à mettre de votre côté directement. Ce sont des conflits qui naissent, mais également parmi les causes, il y a aussi cette dispute de pouvoir coutumière. Séverine a trop parlé du comme une entité d'épée, bien sûr, parce que des groupes armés n'opèrent pas de ces côtés-là, mais il y a certains conflits qui sont cachés derrière, qui sont aussi trop pertinents, mais qui n'attirent pas l'attention tellement ils ne sont pas visibles, parce que Idjui est aussi reconnu en deux, parce qu'il y a Idjui Nord, Idjui Sud, sinon déjà que ce soit divisé, ça crée quelques conflits internes parce que ça provient de très loin dans l'histoire, que des fils, en fait, l'un reconnu comme légalement désigné par le père, et c'est lui qui rêvait, en tout cas, l'autorité coutumière. Par contre, l'autre rêvait l'autorité administrative. Ça fait que même pour se marier, deux fois, quand tu t'es marié à du Sud, c'était un peu compliqué. On disait, est-ce qu'elle va s'en sortir parce que là, ils vont la maltraiter parce qu'elle provient du Nord ou carrément du Sud. Alors, vous comprenez que ce sont aussi des conflits qui sont pertinents mais qui n'attirent pas tellement d'attention. Mais à un certain niveau, c'est aussi entretenu par certaines autorités. Ça sévit plutôt du côté sud-sud du territoire vers Bijombo, c'est territoire d'Ouvira, territoire des Fizi, où des autorités peuvent facilement, en fait, quand tu as l'autorité, tu places une autorité coutumière, tu l'intronises, et quand ton pouvoir est fini et qu'il y a remaniement, une autre autorité vient, il met aussi il intronise quelqu'un d'autre. Alors là, la coutume n'est pas suivie, mais c'est plutôt trop administratif que chaque autorité, lorsqu'il se place au pouvoir ou qu'il est placé au pouvoir, il peut changer les autorités comme il veut. Même une autorité qui ne rencontre pas soit les attentes de la population ou qui n'est pas accepté par la communauté, mais tellement il a le poids de Kinshasa, le pouvoir, qu'il a l'autorité nationale derrière. Alors, vous n'allez pas le bouger, Vous pouvez ne pas le vouloir, mais il est quand même là. Vous n'en ferez. Il y a aussi parmi les causes l'identité ethnique. En fait, les gens ne s'acceptent pas seulement de par leur ethnie. Juste parce que tu es Munyamulenge ou tu es Mouchi, tu n'es pas accepté juste par ça. C'est pas que tu as commis des crimes, mais c'est juste qu'on ne t'accepte pas de par ton ethnie. Et ça, c'est plus pertinent encore à Bijombo, où vous pouvez dormir, vous vous réveillez, c'est une communauté a incendié les maisons d'une autre communauté parce qu'ils estiment que telle communauté, au fait, habite illégalement sur le sol d'une autre communauté, et vous vous portez très mal jusqu'à incendier les maisons des uns et des autres. Et, mais également, ces conflits proviennent également de cet entretien des groupes armés sur le sol congolais avec l'exploitation illégale des minerais, des richesses du pays cachées derrière. Et les pays s'entre-accusent Les pays s'entre-accusent entre eux. Le Rwanda qui accuse le Burundi qui accuse le Rwanda, le Congo qui accuse le Rwanda, ainsi de suite. Et vous portez mal le Rwandais en vous. Moi-même, ça faisait un temps, ça fait que 3 ou 4 ans que je peux maintenant me promener au Rwanda, je suis à l'aise, sinon je portais très mal. Alors, et nous, moi, comme activiste de droits humains, je suis plus... j'apporte une attention particulière sur la femme parce que les femmes sont le plus victimes de ces conflits intercommunautaires, malheureusement, avec des moyens qui sont pas conséquents pour faire face à ces défis. Yeah.
Je vous remercie beaucoup, Prisca. Et c'est très important ce que vous venez de dire parce que ça met vraiment l'accent sur les conflits locaux, les conflits intercommunautaires que nous, internationaux, venant de l'étranger, on ne peut pas nécessairement soit voir, soit comprendre et certainement pas adresser. Donc ça renforce vraiment l'importance d'écouter les gens qui viennent de ces communautés et de prendre leur savoir et leur analyse comme la base de toutes nos actions. Et ce qui est aussi intéressant, c'est par rapport à Idjoui, ces tensions entre Idjoui Nord et Idjoui Sud, le fait qu'elles existent, elles sont extrêmement prégnantes, historiquement parlant. Et ce qui est fascinant, c'est qu'elles aboutissent rarement à de la violence ouverte. Alors qu'à Bijombo, par exemple, les conflits communautaires font énormément de violence ouverte. Merci Prisca, ça va. Je vois Megan qui nous fait des grands signes comme quoi il faut qu'on arrête, mais je pourrais vraiment vous écouter pendant des heures. Et j'espère qu'on va le faire d'ailleurs.
D'accord, merci.
Many, many thanks to Prisca and to Séverine. And I hope that those of you who are here with us today also take advantage of being able to speak a bit longer with them. So we are with that going to wrap up our opening plenary. One more time, a strong thank you to Prisca and to Séverine and to Marriët as well. For all of you, we hope to see you at the virtual venue. Start heading to your first sessions of the day, and we're really excited to see you online or here. Thanks, everyone.